there, my name is Ali Selvaraj, and today we will be assessing two different cuts of beef and determining the quality by using an MSA scoring guide. So I just went to my local grocer and I picked up two different cuts. We're going to be examining T-bone steak and also rump steak. So I picked these two cuts because they do differ quite largely in price, and I would like to investigate the reasons as to why that is. So when assessing steak, you would be looking at a couple of different qualities that we will get into a bit later. But first of all, both the steaks came in a vacuum sealed package, so we will be taking that out very soon and seasoning that up before we start to discuss the different qualities of each of the steaks. The first cut that we will be looking at is the T-bone steak. So you can see it right here. It is quite large just from the get-go, you can see. So this cut of steak can be found in between the sirloin and the ribs. So the primal cut of this meat is called the short loin. So this is found along the spine, which you can see from the distinct T-bone in the middle. And we've got the two back muscles on either side as well. Now, this cut of steak is comprised of skeletal muscle, also connective tissue, and a lot of intramuscular fat. So you can see the intramuscular fat here. That's what's going to give it its soft texture and marbling. And we will be distinguishing just how much marbling is in this a little bit later. It's also got quite a bit of fat along the outside of it as well, which will come from its position on the cow. However, this fat is actually quite soft. It is not super tough, unlike some other pieces of steak as well. So now we'll be looking at the cheaper cut that I got, which is the rump steak. So this is quite a thick and meaty cut of steak. Already you can see it's got a large chunk of fat here that it is quite tough, which may be one of the reasons it is a slightly cheaper cut of steak. We can also see a little bit of intramuscular fat, but it is not that as prominent as you would see in the T-bone steak. Now the rump steak, this is part of the rump primal group, and it's comprised of 5 muscles. It is boneless, and it can be found between the sirloin and the top side of the cow. So the muscles, they all differ in texture, which gives it its kind of round shape, and it also means that different parts of it may feel and taste different. So just from a quick assessment, I can already see that this part is a little bit more firmer, and this part is a little bit more softer than the rest of it. It does differ in color, and it is cheaper, but it is said to be a bit more flavoursome rather than the T-bone and other higher quality cuts of beef. I will be assessing the quality of the cuts by using these Assignme and MSA marbling guides, as well as the fat color guides and the meat color guides, just to assess the quality more accurately. But I just want to have a side-by-side comparison of both of the cuts of beef before we get started. So delving in, we're going to look at the T-bones cut first. So as you can see, it does have quite a bit of intramuscular fat just running along the middle here. This would bring me to say it has a marbling score of around 600-ish, 600, maybe even borderline 700, due to the levels of intramuscular fat that I can see. So these little lines here, this actually gives it its marbling score. There are a bit of lines up here, however, this is actually connective tissue. Just here, when you touch it, it is a little bit more firmer, so they can sometimes be confused as marbling, but what we're looking for is this kind of softer color in between dispersed throughout the muscle. We're also going to be looking at the meat color. The color is quite light, it's not dark yet. Now this was sitting inside this vacuum seal package and has only recently come out, so it will hopefully get redder very soon while it sits before I season it. So I would give it a score of around 2 to 3 for meat color. You can't see very well in the camera, but just take my word for it. We're also going to be looking at the fat color as well. This is really important when grading beef as well. So we've got the fat around here, which I would say has a score of around 3, which I think is acceptable. From the get-go, you can see the complete difference between the cuts just in terms of color and also overall size. If we look through here, the T-bone steak is quite thinner. and this rump steak is thicker, giving it more yield. So if we're looking at here, there's definitely significantly less marbling in this than there was in the rump steak, than there was in the T-bone. There is still a little bit of it, so that would bring me to give it a score of around 200, like pushing 300 if we're being generous. And you can also see that connective tissue quite prominently in this one as well. Now, the biggest difference I would say is the color of meat. This is quite a dark cut of meat, which is often undesirable in the market. So I would give it a score of 5 to even maybe 6, just from my perspective. Also, looking at the color of the fat, it is quite dark and it's really, really tough. I would give it a score of approximately 4. So we're going to get straight into the cooking of it. So first off, we're starting with the T-bone steak. We are just searing it in a pan. This is going to be like a dry cook. So we're trying to get a crispy exterior and have this nice marbling that we've got going through the steak dispersed within it, which should give it a nice rich flavor. We're just cooking it really basic. It's just some salt, oil, butter, onion, and also some garlic. We're just trying to keep it simple so we can really focus on the flavor. And now we have the exact same thing with the rump steak. This is a bit more thicker. Whilst rump can be good for a nice steak, this cut may be just a bit too thick and tough for it to be sufficient. Now, the second method of cooking we're going to try for is significantly different. It's something called a wet cook, and it's stewing. So by doing this, we'll be seasoning it the exact same way. However, we've just added beef broth to the pot. So this will make everything a little bit more tender, hopefully. So this is said to be good for cuts of beef that have a little bit more tough texture, like the rump steak. So it should hopefully loosen up that connective tissue and the fibers that are within it to make it a little bit more palatable. Wait for our sauce to go along with this, it's the taste testing time. So first we are going to start with our T-bone steak, and then we'll make our way to our rump steak. Now, these were cooked for the same amount of time, but as you can see, this one, due to the fact that it is a lot thicker, is significantly more rare than this one here. Now, when eating these cuts, they were quite soft to chew. I didn't have any issues with it, whereas this one was rather tough. Now, if we're going to be ranking the cuts of steak, I would do it by the different ways I approach eating it. So just by looking at it, I would give it about a 70 for looks, but an 80 for smell. After tasting it, it was probably around an 80 for taste. It's pretty good, and my knife was very easy to cut through it. So I'd say it's about an 85 for texture. Now that is probably due to the nice marbling that it had. So overall, probably about a 90. Now we're looking at the rump steak. I would say this smelled like fine. It was 80, so probably about a 60 for looks. The taste was okay. I would say about a 65. It was a bit too tough for me though, which is why I would only give it maybe a 55 to 60 for texture. So overall it ranked about a 70. So it wasn't as good being pan fried. So here you can see that I stewed both of these and they're both in soups. So here we've got the rump steak and here we've got the T-bone steak. Now these were cooked for the same amount of time, same heat. So they started off under low temperature and they slowly made their way up to about medium, and I left them there for about 30 minutes, so much slower cooked rather than the pan fried. These, you can see, they actually look quite juicier, and I can confirm that they were. They had more flavor to them and they were much more palatable. Now for the ratings for these, I think you know what I'm going to say. I would give them both about a 40 for looks. They didn't look that appetizing, but I would say about an 80 for smell for the rump steak, and probably about a 75 for taste, but definitely an 85 for texture. It definitely improved the texture, slow cooking it and allowing those fibers to loosen up and that connective tissue to kind of disperse through. However, this has gotten a very low rating for everything. Smell is still probably about a 70, but definitely about a 30 for looks or 40. 10 for taste and 10 for texture. It was very dry and I did not enjoy eating it. This was not a suitable method to cook this cut of beef. The one that you prefer is definitely very subjective depending on what you look for and how you're cooking it. So cooking method definitely can bring out good qualities in some parts of the meat depending on the cut, and some of them they do not work very well for. So it's important to assess the quality of your meat so you can decide how it's best to cook it.